Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Good for Earth, a 24-hour virtual marathon streaming live around the world to bring together bright minds and best practices on sustainable food systems for the regenerating planet. This session is organized by the Future Food Institute and FAO e-Learning Academy. And we are your host. We have Anusha Murthy and myself, Elizabeth York. We are the co-founders of Edible Issues. So Edible Issues actually began at the Food Innovation Program, which was created by the Future Food Institute. And we have been researching the Indian food system since 2018. We use publications, newsletters, workshops, conversations, and meetups to share this information with the general public. And we are really, really excited to be here with some incredible people from the Indian food system. I'll just give you brief introductions about who they are. We have Simrit Malhi, the founder of Roundstone Farms in Kodaikanal. She's been studying and working in the ecological sphere for more than 10 years now, and right from ecotourism to sustainable landscape design. And she started India's first permaculture design consultancy in Mumbai, and since done everything she can to bring permaculture into the country's mainstream media. We also have Ajay Virjakar, who is here, who is a citrus farmer based in Punjab. He is the chairman of the Bharat Krishak Samaj, which was formed in 1955 and is an association of farmers who are advocating for farmer prosperity. He regularly holds seminars and conferences on the issues of relevance to the farming community, and we were really lucky to be part of one such event called the Food Systems Dialogue that took place last year in December. He's a passionate advocate of policies for farmer prosperity, self-sustainability, and equal opportunities. We also have Fiona Arakal, who is the director at Ishka Farms. Ishka Farms was once a barren piece of land and is now undergoing a transformation through the cultivation of capers, which is not really a traditional crop that grows in India, but the regenerative agriculture practices have not just helped the land, but they have also have a profound impact on the local socio-economic climate. Um, Fiona, Fiona, Ajay, and Simrit, we're really excited to have you here. So before we go into the discussion on how might we empower communities to establish food sovereignty coming out of COVID-19, we have Anusha who will quickly take us through a few signals that we are seeing at the moment in the Indian food system. Anusha, over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Elizabeth. I'm just quickly going to share my screen. Is everybody able to see the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So we're just going to, for all of the attendees here who are not from India, we're just going to quickly take you through some of the signals from India that have been occurring in the Indian food system while we're in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So for those of you who aren't aware, on the 24th of March, the government of India ordered a nationwide lockdown for 21 days, limiting the movement of about 1.3 billion people in India, which was a preventive measure against the 2020 pandemic. So over these couple of weeks, we've been seeing a lot of signals around the Indian food system. So to start off with the timeline, it started off as a complete shock to the system when the migrant workers started moving back to the villages. So on the left, you can see fishes being thrown back into the sea because of loss of the fish catch. Whereas on the right, you'd be able to see the rabi harvest being affected because of the lack of farm workers. As the weeks progressed, we also saw some interesting examples where farmers started mobilizing themselves to supply small packets of vegetables in their own villages. Whereas this was also a case where the farms were able to deliver to urban people as well, which is a direct delivery to their doorsteps as the pandemic progressed. And currently, we're also seeing more and more consumers themselves starting to get interested into the food supplies from farms and starting to organize themselves as well. Whereas charities and companies are also coming together in helping raise funds for feeding vulnerable communities during this pandemic as well. So we thought that this would be a great part for us to stop and reflect on how our food system is right now. So the topic for today that we're focusing on will be how might we empower communities to establish food sovereignty. So food sovereignty in simple terms is about food for people. It puts people's need for food in the center of all policies. It's not it seems like a complex topic, because it's rooted in the realities of producing, buying, selling, and eating food, and it believes that control over the food system needs to be in the hands of people who are both producing food as well as consuming food, by ensuring diverse and nutritious food supplies. So while we're in the midst of this pandemic, we thought it would be interesting for us to think of a future for the food system post-COVID, and how will we be working towards a more sustainable food futures for all of us. So on that note, I would like to stop here and start off with opening up questions to the entire panel. Ajay, Simrit, and Fiona, I'd like you to go turn on turn and say, how has COVID changed the way you're currently involved with the food system? Ajay, would you want to go first?
I am locked at my house with a lock-in that's happening in India, but my son is on the farm in the village, and so work is happening on the farm. And so in rural India, I think so economic activity of what's happening on the farm is going on as before. It has had an adverse impact in the sense that people stopped buying chicken and eggs, connecting them with COVID. Unfortunately, it's just a myth, but not much was done to evade it. So lots of poultry farms suffered as a consequence. Also, what has happened as a consequence is that the dairy has also suffered because of the lockdown, because of milk supplies could not come to demand. Lots of dairy farmers, in fact, all dairy farmers, vegetable farmers have suffered in the sense that there's been no demand, and vegetables being perishable could not be left on the farm for long after ripening. So they had to be allowed to rot on the ground, which was very bad. Now, for me, personally, on my farm, we had potatoes to sell, and we got delayed by around 2 weeks for selling them, but we managed to sell them now. So the market space is opening up. I think so. The government has allowed for a few notifications which allows movement of farm goods to happen.
Okay. Fiona, do you want to take us through what's happening with Ishka Farms during the COVID situation?
So the COVID situation is in two parts, like my husband and I were discussing, because we run the farm together. So the pandemic as such, we seem to be quite de-risked from our farm model, because we don't have a perishable crop. It's a crop that we process on the farm in-house facility, and we believe that the market will be there for it. But yes, the day-to-day running of the farm, I can't give you the rosy picture that some people are able to, that rural India is functioning. The part that we are in is functioning in a very limited manner. So what we are able to do on our farm is, yes, we can run the drip lines, so we can water the plants and we can provide nutrition. This is peak harvest season for us, but we cannot harvest like we usually do. So whereas I normally have 4 or 5 products to put out in the market at this point in time, I can only grow one type. And because we are a processing unit on the farm, we don't have permission for the processing unit to run. So we cannot process as normal. We are a farm that depends on the Great Indian Railway System for delivery, because we work directly with all of our customers. We don't have distributors. So with the railways not working, with courier services not working, with the restaurants being shut, it's really an impossible situation as selling is concerned. But the way we look at it, because our model provides for us to hold our goods, perhaps there's light at the end of the tunnel and we'll still have a market to sell to. Because we sell direct to customers, I feel that when the worst of this is over and the lockdown is lifted, we'll still have clients out there.
Thanks, Fiona. Simrit, do you want to take us through what's happening at your
end? Hi. So I was caught out of my farm, so I'm not on the farm right now, and I have a caretaker who's taking care of it. But in general, Roundstone Farms works on a education model, more than supplying produce. Though we supply specific produce. Right now is our off season for avocados, and it's summertime, so there's less water. None of our the farm is only rain fed. So actually it's kind of a off time for the farm right now. It's kind of working out. And I feel like the way COVID has changed the way I've been involved in the food system is mostly as a knowledge keeper. And I find a lot of people reaching out to me to ask questions about where they can go to learn more about growing their own food or being self-sustainable. And yeah, it's been interesting. A lot of people really interested right now. So I think it's great that people being at home and thinking about their food supply chains and where they're going to get food from. It's great that people are thinking about this right now and reaching out to people like me to find out more about what they can do. So that's what COVID's done.
Right. That's interesting. So Ajay, you have experience in working with collectives of farmers, as well as you being a farmer yourself and an advocate for policy on food and food systems as well. How are you looking at food security and food sovereignty in a post-COVID India?
I think what has happened is because of mass daily wagers being sent back to the villages or rushing back to the villages in fear of COVID, lots of establishments, most establishments closing in the country. So I think from a position where we were talking about food security or productivity till around, let's say, a few months ago, today the question is of food availability to the masses. And food availability is where I would look at for food sovereignty. If you were looking at COVID, I would stop my thinking process there and say the priority right now is to make sure that everybody has food to eat, and hopefully it's nutritious food. I think the government of India has the food stocks to make that available. I think the government of India has the capacity to make it available. The government of India hopefully will do that. And that's the question. If you elaborate, then the two kinds of people who are in real need of food now. One is those who have some sort of a documentation with the public distribution system where they're entitled to something because they have a documentation, and the large sections of society which do not have a documentation. So to some extent, some of the factors of those who have documentation may have been covered with the with what government has distributed. But I think the government food stocks are more than double of what they normally have in a buffer time. And I think there is enough food stocks for the government to give 25 million tons of food grains to different states for distribution to those who do not have proper documentation, and to run urban, soup kitchens for people in urban areas who may not be able to cook, but who are on the streets today. Migrants are on the streets today. So I think the government has the capacity. Hopefully it will have the will to act also.
And do you see a change in probably what is being grown and what we think would be grown at this point?
Yes, I think, see, lots of farmers who are growing perishable products have suffered because they could not sell the perishable products. Unlike me, luckily we had potatoes, so it was not something, it was not a desperation. But I think lots of farmers who were growing perishables and they could not sell the perishables or could not get a good price at all will now think twice before growing perishables. And they would prefer to grow millets or some other crop which has more of a, which can be stored or sold later. And that could actually lead to very high food inflation if you look at vegetable prices. I think 6 months down the line, I foresee this change. Like one of our colleagues right now was saying, there's a problem of labor coming on the farm, of harvesting. So I think we could see food inflation spiking 6 months from now. The government may be able to provide food grain from food FCI food stocks, but it will not be able to provide vegetables. So that's what leads to food inflation. So I foresee that happening 6 months from now because of how the lockdown has been rolled out.
Actually, while we were at the food systems dialogue last year, is when we were talking about how this entire vicious cycle of the PDS system acquiring the dry grains and supply, and in which in turn likely leads to farmers growing more of dry goods. So do you think that is something that would continue to happen? Like, do you think there's a policy intervention here that could probably stop that while we're at this and probably make millets more lucrative at this point?
See, what I see, every society, every country, nation makes laws depending on where they are in their ladder for economic development. India made these rules in the 1960s when we were on a food to mouth, from a ship to mouth sort of a problem, and we had huge issues. So those problems of food security have been overcome for a large extent, but unfortunately, a lot of people still require that food. And I was thinking, and we were anticipating that we would have some changes on these procurement programs of the central government. But because of the lockdown, I think they could be around, if you look at the YouTube videos of sensible economists talking about it, they talk about anywhere from 25 to 35% of the population is unemployed today. So I think this whole discussion, should we have a PDS? Should we not have a PDS? Should we have unlimited procurement of wheat and rice? And will stall because of the COVID. Because at the moment, the priority will be to have maximum amount of food grains in the government control to be able to give to people who deserve it, who need it, and that's the responsibility of the government. So to sum it up, I would say that the discussion about moving away from what you were indicating has been shifted by a few years now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ajay. So looking at a more urban perspective, Simrit, my next question is to you. The conversation around self-sufficiency in terms of growing your own food has been there for a while, but it appears that the lockdown has pushed many people to do so from a more emergency measure, considering there's not enough farm workers to harvest perishables, or even perishables, even that are those that are harvested are not available in cities right now. So how do you see this trend? Like, what has it been like for you? How has the interest in growing food changed? You did mention that more people are keen about growing their own food. Can you share something about how your education approach towards that works?
I'm a permaculture farmer, so I come from a space of looking at it from a holistic point of view. I don't think it's possible to change the way that we grow our food without changing the entire system around it. So coming from a permaculture space, it would be a multi-crop farm. Even if you're in the city, you don't grow just one thing, because the main point of it would be to try to be self-sustainable in trying to grow enough food for yourself and your family first. I don't know if it's completely possible in a city, but there is space. Everything is possible. So the supply chains and all of this, the system that happens around the farmer will have to change if you're going to change the way you farm or the way that you grow food. So if you're in a urban setting, it would be interesting. It would be like a neighbor would be facing the south, or another neighbor's balcony would be facing the east, and then maybe you grow different foods, and within a building you grow different produce that would work, and then you can help each other by sharing and exchanging. What was your question? That people...
My question was more towards your approach in food education, but then based on what you're saying,
right. So my approach would be that not everyone has to be a farmer, or not everyone needs to grow food in a city to be able to help fix the system or to do something around it. We need so much help in terms of systemizing everything, maybe programming or creating software for people to be able to use when someone has something available for it to be shared with the rest of the community. And also, coming from a permaculture space, I think the first thing is for people to actually come together first, or maybe building societies, or people not obviously physically, but online. So I think that the word social distancing is also wrong. Maybe it should be more of a physical distance rather than socially, because right now is really when we need to be in touch with each other the most. to help each other out and to see where things are going wrong. Like I know that certain building societies, their garbage thing kind of broke down in Goa. I'm talking about, I'm in Goa right now. So for 3 or 4 days, Goa had a problem where there was no food or medicine or garbage, or like there was just a shutdown for 2 days completely. That brought out a lot of interesting problems or solutions, one of which was to start composting within your building society. And number two was to find out who are the most vulnerable people within the society, what they need. And really, food sovereignty and growing food comes from a social communal space. You can't grow food just for yourself. Like, how many tomatoes can you eat? So it's really about connecting with your society around you. That's what I see. And this is what I try to, this is my educational approach, is to talk to your neighbors and see what people need. And there's knowledge. There might be someone in your building who knows how to grow or knows how to, make compost. You don't need to go across the world to find out.
So do you think this entire idea of self-sufficiency from this perspective is more of a knee-jerk reaction, considering that we're scared about depending on food?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what it's like in the cities. I know in Goa, it was kind of scary for a minute because there was no food available. But it was really interesting how almost immediately there were like WhatsApp groups. There were people helping each other out. WhatsApp groups based on locations. So there would be something for, Arpora or North Goa, whatever. And there would be someone who would say, oh, there's a truck with eggs over here right outside my building. I'm just going to buy like 7 dozen, and whoever wants can come and pick them up from me. And then there were like barter things going on. Someone was like, I need tobacco. Can I exchange for eggs and stuff like that? And that's really where community thrives. And I don't think it's something that needs to be, I think maybe letting go of our dependency on the government or dependency on a current food system is what will help us create a community and maybe be more self-sufficient.
Thanks, Simrit. Fiona, now over to you. We've seen, because we spoke like almost 2 years ago, and we learned of the incredible model that you have at Ishka Farms, where you've regenerated the land, you've regenerated society. What has how has the current pandemic situation affected the farmers and their families, and how has does this affect the small system that you've created there? What is it like now?
So actually taking off from what Ajay had to say, because he brought up the issue of migrant labor. One of the things that we are incredibly happy that we did is when I spoke with you 2 years ago, I said we will work 100% with local labor, that we will not bring labor in from other states or other geographies. The whole idea is to work with the people in our area. And I'm glad we did that, because today I can't complain that we are short of labor availability. Labor is available. The issue comes when bureaucracy says that you cannot cross village borders. It's very difficult to explain to somebody sitting in a district headquarters 50 kilometers away that the next village is actually 2 kilometers away, and that's where my trained staff are. So that is the problem on ground level. I understand the reason to have these boundaries that says X village cannot cross over to Y. But when you have the lines drawn only on a map without understanding where the farms are spread or how they are spread, that's where the issue happens. So I'm willing to employ all of the regular people that we do, because they are from within a 25-kilometer radius, but the fact is they cannot make it. So because they cannot make it, I can't give them daily wages, can I? Or, the ones, because you must understand that although we take a lot of people on our rolls, people in the village don't necessarily want to work every single day of their life for the same company, because there are many months in the year that they work on their own tiny half an acre of land. So a lot of these are regulars in my head as far as I'm concerned, because we've trained them how to pluck the capers, how to grade the capers, and how to cure them. So right now I'm limited to very few male staff from the hamlet right outside of my farm, and therein lies the problem. Ajay also brought up a very important question, important point about the perishability of vegetables and why some people may choose to not grow that in the future. I can see that's going to happen, and I hope the one fix that we do is that we emphasize supply chain management for perishable goods in our country. Because the fact is, people have stuff, people need stuff. It's the linkage that's not working. So that linkage is what we need to focus on, because like Simrat said, it may not be possible for everyone to grow all of what they need. I need the onion, tomato, garlic, the spinach, whatever. Some of it may grow where I am. We can tell people eat seasonal, eat local. I agree with all of that. But the fact is, the food system is the way it is right now. Knee-jerk reaction is not going to change everything. We'll have to accept that these things need changes, and we'll need to work on it maybe sooner rather than later. But from what both Ajay and Simran said, it resonates, even though Ishka Farm right now has only 2 commercial crops. We do spend a lot of time and energy on creating biodiversity within the farm. So obviously, in a few years, I'm going to have fruits, I'm going to have chilies, I'm going to have lemon. How am I going to reach all of that to the people in the city who want it? Because we are in, the farm is in boondocks, right? There's a reason we use the railways, because, I cannot truck a small truck of things out to the nearest big town. It doesn't work that way. Or if the demand is in the tier A cities, I cannot reach perishables there from where we are. So I think those are the fixes that we will have to work on. And like I said, I'm really glad we work 100% with local labor. I'm glad that each and every one of them, even though they're daily labor, have all opened bank accounts. So if the government is handing out benefits to that level of society who will need it, they all have accounts, send the money in.
Sorry. So we're seeing this incredible power of the local food system, something that you've created years ago, and everybody's been talking about. Actually, in a pandemic, in a situation like this, is actually showing like fruition, and people are looking at this model to grow, how they can grow in the future. I'm very interested to also understand, because one of the commercial crops you grow are capers, and I don't think capers are grown around India in such a way and such a fashion. And one of the main targets for your production was the restaurant industry. And given the current situation they are going through now, how does this demand supply kind of have affected your business as well?
Because we are a young farm and we come from a background of being entrepreneurs and not traditional farmers, we approached it differently, right? So I have created multiple markets. So obviously, our partners in the restaurant industry are going through a rough time, which means we are definitely not going to be selling to them for a while. But we are in brick and mortar stores. We do supply directly to homes. And we also have worked on rather large international relationships. So the minute the lockdown is lifted, we will hopefully focus on that. Our first container load will sail out, which then means we can continue to support the large community who've worked with us now for 5 years. And creating multiple markets has helped us de-risk, and I think that's the key to Ishka Farm survival for now.
And how would you, sorry, go ahead, Anusha.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to also, so you did mention that you wanted to diversify in the future, but then at this stage, do you think that probably multiple farmers around are also thinking about how they must be diversifying their produce and thinking about not putting all of their eggs in one basket?
So our diversification was only from the ecology point of view. I didn't want to monocrop. So whereas I want to create that niche market of having a caper farm and the moringa, because we were learning how to farm. So these are the only 2 crops that I can sell. But on a large holding of land, I can't just plant 2 things. It's not healthy for anyone. It's not for the plant, not for the land, definitely not for the people. So I can't jump onto the permaculture bandwagon at this point in time, but we take lessons from that approach to farming, which is why we have an aggressive plan where we've been doing about 4,000 to 5,000 trees a year. I use the word trees very loosely because there's neem, there's tamarind, there's guava, there's lemon, there's anything that normally would grow in that area that we are in. So I don't know how much of that is going to be commercial. We did that so that the commercial crop that we're growing does really well. It thrives. And we fulfill, the check boxes that we made for ourselves, where we said we're not going to monocrop. The whole idea of buying the land and nurturing the land is to look after it and make it regenerative. So if we monocropped, the purpose would be defeated.
Thanks, Fiona.
Can I say something?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Simrit.
I just want to say also that the supply chain around farms and the food supply chain in India is really targeted towards monocropping and towards farms that grow one crop in large large amounts, because that's the easiest way to get it sent to a mandi and get it sent and get the wholesale prices. To grow a biodiverse farm in an Indian context, it would be really difficult right now for the farmer to really survive, because each produce, there would be too little of each produce for it to make sense for him to send it to a mandi. You can't send CSA boxes to a mandi. You have to send like at least 20 kilos of beans or 20 kilos of potatoes. Like it's a sack and it gets taken, and there's a whole transportation system. So I just wanted to reiterate that this is what I was talking about, that when we change our farming practices, the supply chain around it needs to change to support that. And currently that's not happening. It's a very monocrop based supply chain as well.
So to add to that, Simrit, when I said export, for example, we are able to export because we have a long shelf life. So we are talking about the fact that we held produce for 3 years, and now I can fill a container. Now I've created enough of an interest in Ishka Farms in the international market, where I found partners willing to work with us. So it's a long process. If you can't hold out, or if you're going to look at earnings from the farm to send your kids to school next month, it's not going to happen, and that's the reality. Unfortunately.
Yep.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to another question, and this is for Ajay. We're seeing this involvement of urban population looking at the food system and saying that, okay, we are more curious to know more. We want to help the supply chain. We want to help the farmer. How is this shift in mindset, or this curiosity that's developed over these couple of weeks? How could that maybe help in changing some of this, or shaping some of this food policy that we need in the country?
So to expect the urban population to be moved to change the food system, I think so would be an illusion itself. I don't think so it's going to last beyond a month or 2 months of the problem. They will forget it the moment this COVID crisis is over. Hopefully it is. God knows when it will be. The only way food systems can be changed is provided urban consumers pay the real cost of growing food. If you want the cheapest available food, then you're going to have monoculture, you're going to have pesticide usage, and you're going to have everything that you don't want on your food. Now, if you're not ready to pay a higher price for your food, the food systems is not going to change. And like I said originally, the difference is between at what levels of society we are at. Now in India, we have 25 to 35% unemployment today. Even if the lockdown gets opened, I don't think so demand is going to pick up for the economy to revive very fast, because people will conserve whatever little resources they are getting from the government, which government will be giving, or what salaries they're giving. So I think we should be practical in our estimation of where we are going. I don't think so there's going to be any change. In fact, the food systems approach may get hit because of the COVID. It's not, as you're saying, because people will start thinking about it. It's just that there'll be more demand of cheaper food. And because, as I was saying, you can expect higher food inflation 6 to 8 months from now. now to control that food inflation, we've seen in the last 5-10 years that every government's policy has been to target farmers to keep price of food down so inflation does not hit the consumers, and that is the urban classes. And so what I foresee is that on one side, the farmer is not will have produce 6 to 8 months from now, a different kind of produce, but even for that, the government will not allow prices to rise. For example, we sold our potatoes in the market for around 14 rupees a kg, which was a very, very high rate. Not because there was shortage, but the potato crop was around 10% of the normal this year. It's just that it would have sold for much higher. I think so 5 months or 6 months from now, potatoes will be selling for 50 rupees a kg. And then the government will come in with notifications not allowing storage of potatoes or import of potatoes and things like that. So I don't see, in short, I don't see a COVID crisis in the villages change leading to a mindset where urban consumers will be ready to pay more, which is crucial for a food systems change. Because like a colleague was saying, there is monoculture. Obviously, there is monoculture because consumers don't want to pay a full price of doing a biodiversity rich farming practice. So it's like a chicken and egg story. Somebody has to take the lead. It should have been the government, but the government has different priorities today. In fact, it
Thank
has
you.
had different priorities in the last 10 years also.
Thank you, Ajay. That definitely gives us a lot to think of as also where us as urban consumers stand in this whole conversation. Because we have only about 15 minutes left, I'm going to take a few questions that we have for us. So Madhumita asks, can you tell us more about how COVID would export further change? Could you tell us about how would export change how would export change after post-COVID? Do you want to take that, Fiona?
I think exports will actually pick up as far as food produce is concerned, because India, at least for now, in the food producing areas, we haven't taken such a hit. When you look at Europe and America, their farming communities are hit much more. Labor is going to be an issue. At least as far as the capers are concerned, I have a very positive outlook on what's going to happen with export. And the one thing that's going to happen is people are going to start paying the true price of the product. Because like Ajay said, it's incredibly expensive to run an organic farm, especially with a produce like capers. In India, we've always had people cribbing about the cost of capers, our capers as compared to imported produce. Now we are going to have discussions that people will have to participate in about the cost of producing something organically and transporting it. And I think because of some kind of artificial shortage, people will learn to pay the price.
Thanks, Fiona. So the next question is from Abhilash Verma. He asks, are we going to see more direct producer to consumer supply of agriculture produce in the near future, as online delivery platforms will have comparatively less cooked food deliveries to be made?
Definitely, and I hope it happens. This is what we've been working at Ishka Farms for the past 4 years, and it has been so difficult to set up those channels. And I can list examples of many farms in India which have been lucky enough to be near urban centers, who in the past 3 weeks have started great vegetable baskets and great produce basket, not just vegetables. And I hope it continues after the crisis is done with.
But Ajay, going off on this, considering most of the farms in India are also smallholder farms, how do you see that happening? Like, how do you see the unionizing happening for something like this?
I think the change is going to be very slow. It's not going to be something that will be visible. It's a very, very small percentage of the total food that is produced. I don't even think it's 0.1% or 0.0001%, which is going through direct delivery to households. But I hope it increases. But you also have to keep in mind that in the initial phase of this direct selling to farmers by Walmart, by Amazon, and now you have a new link of Mukesh Ambani with Facebook or something coming on. Now, over a long period, if you look at a horizon, in the first few years, it's very good that you get a market, the farmers get a market. But when these bigger chains have established themselves, then they push down prices of the consumer or of the farmers, or the farm gate price, to get their consumers a better price to increase their profit margins. So their size becomes a monopoly. And that's what I fear, that these chains like these bigger e-commerce platform chains will do. So if you look at the United States, the farmer share in the milk in the dairy industry, or the farmer share, is even less than India. So if you say that value chains are going to develop and they're going to benefit farmers, it's not necessary. I'm not against it, but it's not necessary it will happen. In India, we don't have that kind of a value chain, but farmers are getting a higher share in the consumer price as far as milk is concerned, because it's not centralized as in the US. So I would not want to give a blanket statement that these value chains will develop. Direct selling from farmers to from small farmers to consumers will take place. Yes, there will be success stories. There will be many of them, but even combined, it will not be a huge amount of thing. I'll be very happy with smaller farms doing direct selling, but to expect 4 companies to control 40% of the market, it is like you're being colonized again.
Right. We have one more question from Zari Devitre, who asks, COVID has highlighted the importance of having a shorter supply chain, and the crisis has affected both producers and consumers. Will this become a new normal and force government and policy towards strengthening local food systems? Ajay, would you have something to add to that?
Can you repeat that, please?
COVID has highlighted the importance of having a shorter supply chain, and the crisis has affected both producers and consumers. Will this become a new normal and force the policy towards strengthening the local food systems? It goes off of what we just discussed.
So I think it should lead to a policy change where you have less food miles, where people are procuring different produce. And I think urban consumers have a lot to do with it. You know, if urban consumers start doing some sort of urban farming, they start keeping 5 pots at home, they will educate themselves on different varieties of tomatoes or cucumber, of, watermelon. And if they grow something, right now you go to the market and you say you want a tomato, or you go to the market and you say you want a cucumber, or you want to go to the market, you want a watermelon. So till we are able to, so I'm saying it's going to be from fork to farm. It's not going to be from the farm. We're going to innovate, and then the consumers will get. I think so. It's a demand driven system, and consumers will have to somehow educate themselves. They will be educated over time, as lots of people are doing, is that they start growing small pots of, some mint, or basil or rosemary or tomatoes. It might not be their full requirement, but that is essential. And also, when you look at this, there's an important point to see, is that most of the people who are hungry today are farmers themselves. So when you look at a value chain of monoculture, I think the government should be looking at kitchen gardens, helping farmers and people in rural areas have small kitchen gardens to meet their 60 to 70% of the vegetable requirement. So I think there's a whole approach that the government can take, which can look after 60 to 70% of the micronutrient requirement of the individual farmer families. And at the same time, in urban areas, to increase awareness, we need to start urban farming, not to feed yourselves. I don't think so that's going to happen. But the very act of growing your own stuff, some of it makes you think and then demand such stuff. And that's what's going to lead to a revolution, and it's going to lead to a change.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think that's a great point. So on that note, considering we have very little time remaining, I would ask a question to the entire panel, which is, what does your idea of a utopic food system in India look like? I think, Ajay, you just sort of spoke a little bit about that. So if you would want to also sum up before I pass it on to the other panelists.
I think in rural areas, people should be growing around 50 to 60% of their vegetable requirements at least. I'm not saying they'll be able to grow all of it. And I think each house in urban area, you may have a balcony, you may have a little roof right, you may have some ground with your house, should be growing 1 or 2 pots of vegetables, because that is what will integrate you with the food value chain, and you will start demanding the right stuff. It's like COVID has, like, if you look at the social media, it's in England, people are cooking more, they're baking more cakes and things like that. This is what you look at. So you look at urban India growing some food, not to feed themselves, but to increase awareness, to demand better stuff, and And in villages, people grow 60 to 70% of the vegetable requirement of every household.
Right. Thanks so much, Ajay. Simrit, do you want to take a...
What my utopia would be? My utopia would be that traditional farming knowledge systems are freely available, that we have more access to indigenous seeds, and that there are more seed banks in the country, because we need to get a plant genome back, because the more things get hybrid, the more weak the plant and the food gets, lowers its nutritional value. So I think we need to go back to that. And I think exactly, I think that the urban spaces is really where the most amount of work needs to be done, because all the supply chains are trying to get food into the cities. And I think maybe for cities to start becoming more self-sufficient will be a great idea. And maybe using public spaces like the sides of the roads, trees, growing food in public spaces in the city, that would really be my idea for utopia.
Thanks, Simrit. Fiona?
Utopia for me would be if small farmers were able to form collaborative, collective, and a cooperative approach to reaching the produce to the end consumer. That for me is utopia. So I would then be talking about the large companies not having much of a voice, about a lot of the mandi system being dismantled. So that for me is utopia.
And for people to be nice to each other and kind and take care of each other and make sure no one's
That's general
hungry.
utopia. Farming utopia for me was if we could have
I mean, just to make sure people don't go hungry, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So we're almost out of time, but thank you so much for being here today as we talk about what our food system might look like after COVID and what we hope it would look like after COVID. Thank you, Simrit, Fiona, and Ajay for your incredible thoughts. And we really hope, we're looking forward to definitely the food system changing in a positive way after when and hopefully soon we get out of this situation. So thank you all for being part of our panel and our session for Food for Earth Day, the world's largest session on feeding the future in a 24-hour global marathon with FAO and the Future Food Institute. The next session is in Antarctica and will be hosted by Claudia Larica. And the session will be live in a few minutes from the Future Food Institute's YouTube channel. So thank you all, stay tuned, and thank you again for speaking with us today.
Thank you.